Welcome back, everybody, to Sip and Talk. Oh, my gosh. You won't believe this. I was arguing with my neighbor the other day about how many toes cats have on their front paws.
Oh, no.
And I was like, absolutely certain they only have 4. Yep. Totally wrong. They have 5.
You learn something new every day.
I know. So speaking of learning new things and admitting when we're wrong, we've had a ton of requests to deep dive into Adam Grant's Think At It again.
That's a good one.
So that's what we're going to do today. We've got a really interesting mix of sources, actually. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's a great choice. Think, again, really does make you rethink things you just kind of take for granted, you know?
I'm excited to dive in. I will admit, though, I'm coming into this a little skeptical.
Yeah.
I'm not totally convinced that it's healthy to constantly question everything.
Right.
Like, don't we need some solid ground to stand on?
I get that. That's a pretty common concern, actually, and Grant addresses it right away in the book. It's not about constantly flip-flopping or being indecisive, you know?
Correct.
It's more about cultivating what he calls a scientist mindset.
Ooh, scientist mindset. All right, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay, so he contrasts the scientist mindset with these 3 other mindsets we tend to fall into: the preacher, the prosecutor, and the politician. So like when we're really attached to a belief, we can become like preachers trying to convert everyone to our way of thinking. Or when we spot flaws in someone's argument, we turn into these prosecutors gathering evidence to prove them wrong.
I've definitely been there.
And then you've got the politician mindset where we're trying to win people over, even if it means compromising on our own values.
Wow, I can see myself in all of those.
Oh.
Especially the politician. Sometimes I just want to win the argument, even if I'm not sure I believe what I'm saying.
Yeah.
His scientist mindset, though, it sounds a lot more noble.
Yeah, it is. It's about approaching everything with curiosity and humility, you know? Like a scientist testing a hypothesis. You ask questions, you gather evidence, and most importantly, you stay open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
But honestly, is that really practical to approach everything like a scientific experiment? I mean, don't we need some core beliefs to guide us?
That's where the entrepreneurs come in.
Okay.
Grant talks about this study where they divided entrepreneurs into 2 groups, and both groups learned about business strategies.
Right.
One group was encouraged to treat their strategies like hypotheses, constantly testing and refining based on data. The other group wasn't given that guidance. Guess what happened?
I'm guessing the scientist mindset group did better.
Yeah, you got it. The entrepreneurs who were constantly rethinking and adapting did way better because they were willing to pivot when things weren't working. They saw their mistakes as data points, not failures.
Okay. I can see how that would be super helpful in business.
Yeah.
But how does this apply to, say, like our personal lives? Not every decision is a business deal.
You're right. Not every decision is a business deal, but those principles still apply. Think about it this way. Instead of clinging tightly to our ideas, what if we treated them more like dating? You see how things go, and if they don't work out, you're open to moving on.
That's an interesting analogy.
Yeah.
But doesn't that sound a little exhausting? Always second-guessing yourself.
It's not about second-guessing everything. It's just about being open to learning and growing. It talks about how societal polarization makes it so much harder to actually seek truth. We just dig in our heels and defend our positions, even when there's evidence that we might be wrong.
Oh, that's so true. It's like we're so obsessed with being right that we forget about actually understanding different perspectives.
Exactly. And that's where Think Accurately provides some really helpful tools.
Okay.
For example, Grant talks about the importance of actively seeking out information that challenges our existing beliefs.
That is easier said than done. Nobody likes being wrong. It's so much easier to just stick with what, like that whole cat paw thing. I was so sure I was right. It took literal photographic evidence to convince me otherwise.
Perfect example. We all have those moments where we resist new information, especially when it contradicts something we've always believed. But Think Again actually gives us strategies for those moments and how to embrace the discomfort of being wrong.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but also a little nervous. Like, if I really buy into this whole Think Again philosophy, am I just going to become like a wishy-washy, indecisive mess?
That's a fair concern, and we'll definitely dig into that as we go. But remember that whole boiling frog analogy from the review?
The one that's not even true.
Exactly. The common misconception that a frog will just sit in a pot of slowly boiling water reflects our own tendency to cling to comfortable narratives, even when the evidence says otherwise.
Okay, so we need to be willing to jump out of the pot when things get too hot.
Right.
But how do we know when to jump? How do we balance being a scientist with actually making decisions and sticking to our principles?
That's a great question, and it's something we're going to explore as we continue this deep dive into Think Again.
All right, I'm ready for it. Let's keep going.
Yeah, let's do it. So we've talked about rethinking on a personal level, but what about on like a bigger scale? How do we create a culture of rethinking in our workplaces, schools, even society as a whole?
Yeah, that's what I'm really curious about because it seems like such a huge task. I mean, where do we even begin?
It's definitely a challenge, but Think Again offers some really interesting strategies.
Yeah.
Grant argues that rethinking needs to be like embedded in our institutions, from how we educate kids to how we run our businesses.
So it's not just about having a few open-minded people here and there. We need to actually rethink the systems themselves.
Exactly. Take education, for instance. Instead of presenting textbooks as the ultimate truth, Grant suggests that we should be encouraging students to question them. Like what assumptions are being made? What perspectives are missing?
Wow, that would have blown my mind back in school. I always thought textbooks were like the holy grail,
Right. But imagine a classroom where questioning is not only allowed but encouraged. That's where real learning and innovation happen.
I love that. Okay, so we're rethinking education.
Yeah.
What about the workplace? How do we build a rethinking culture in a setting that's often so focused on results?
Grant talks about the importance of constructive conflict. It's about creating a space where people feel safe to disagree and challenge the status quo without being punished for it.
That sounds great in theory, but isn't conflict kind of risky? Especially at work. It can get messy.
It can, but Grant's point is that avoiding conflict altogether can be even more dangerous. You end up with groupthink and people are afraid to adapt.
So it's about finding that balance where conflict is like welcomed and channeled productively.
Right.
But how do you actually do that? How do you encourage people to speak up without things getting out of control?
One way is to actually reward people for raising tough questions and offering different perspectives. Recognize and appreciate those who think differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. It shows that you actually value rethinking.
Exactly. So we've talked about education and workplaces. Now, what about society as a whole? How do we scale this up to tackle these big, complex problems?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Grant says one of the most important things is to move away from binary thinking. That tendency to see everything as black or white, right or wrong, us versus them.
Oh, yes. It feels like everything is so polarized these days. It's exhausting. Every issue becomes this battleground and there's no room for nuance.
Exactly. Grant says if we can learn to embrace nuance and see things from multiple perspectives and realize that the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, we'll be much better equipped to handle these complex issues.
It's a tall order, but I see what he's saying. If we're always stuck in those us versus them mindsets, we can't even have productive conversations, let alone find calming ground.
Right. Most issues are so multifaceted, and there are usually valid points on all sides. It's not about abandoning your principles, but about being willing to consider other perspectives and realizing that you don't have all the answers.
This whole conversation has really changed my perspective. I'm starting to see the value of rethinking, not just for personal growth, but as a way to create a better world.
Yeah. That's the power of Think Again. Yeah. It challenges you to reconsider your assumptions, have better conversations, and embrace this constant journey of learning and growth.
It's definitely made me think. Okay, so before we wrap up, I have a challenge for you. What's one belief you hold dear that you're willing to rethink?
Ooh, good one. Let me think about that for a second. What about you? What's something you're ready to reconsider?
Oh, there are so many. But I think I'll keep that one to myself for now. I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it.
All right, so we talked about rethinking on a personal level and even in specific settings like work or school. But what about these rethinking ecosystems you mentioned earlier? What exactly are those?
Yeah, so a rethinking ecosystem is basically an environment where questioning assumptions and challenging the status quo is actually encouraged. It could be a school, a workplace, even a family. It's about creating a culture where it's safe to think differently and disagree.
So you're talking about a culture of curiosity and open-mindedness, where rethinking is the norm, not the exception.
Exactly. It's about making rethinking a core part of how things work, both individually and as a group.
Okay, I get it. But how do we actually create these rethinking ecosystems in real life? Where do we even start?
It starts small, with each of us choosing to embrace those. Think, again, principles in our own lives. We can seek out different perspectives, ask more questions, be more willing to change our minds.
So it's about practicing that scientist mindset.
Yeah. And as we get more comfortable rethinking ourselves, then we can start to impact the environments around us, encourage healthy debate in our teams, question the assumptions in our textbooks, advocate for systems that value critical thinking.
Wow, I like that. It's not just about changing our own minds. It's about giving others the space to do the same.
Exactly. And remember, rethinking is an ongoing process. There's no finish line. It's about constantly growing, adapting, and staying open to new ideas.
This has been such an awesome conversation. I'm definitely leaving with a lot to think about, and I feel inspired to apply that think again approach to my own life.
That's great to hear. And remember, even the smallest change in perspective can make a difference. Keep those minds open and never stop asking questions.
So true. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Think Again.
Yeah.
I hope it was as thought-provoking for you as it was for us.
Yeah, if you want to keep the conversation going, be sure to check out our Micky channel for some bonus content related to today's episode.
Perfect. And until next time, keep rethinking, keep learning, and keep those conversations going. See you all soon.